to share with you not only spiritual nourishment in the sanctuary, but also material nourishment as well. So we would like to start sharing with you a short 7 minutes video that was made by Tom Taylor, who is the executive director of the Presbyterian Foundation. He came down to Cuba just before the COVID, and he prepared this video, which we want to share with you because it combines, let's say, both some history and some information, both on our church, the Presbyterian Reformed Church in Cuba, and also on our seminary. I think it's a good introduction. Then I'm going to share a PowerPoint for about half an hour more, and then we will be open to Q&A. Thank you.
For many of us, the name Cuba evokes thoughts of the Communist Revolution in 1959 or the missile crisis under President John F. Kennedy. Others may think of the glamour days when the rich and famous vacationed here enjoying the culture, the sun, the music, and the cigars that this island is famous for. But what few may know is that the Presbyterian Church has had a deep and enduring presence here for more than 120 years, even during all the years of the Revolution. And these Presbyterian congregations here today are thriving.
During the first 30 years of the Revolution, it was quite difficult for the churches to carry out their mission. There was a subtle type of discrimination against the different Christians. That was my own experience. I was 2 years old when the Revolution triumphed. My father was a Cuban pastor. My mother was an American missionary. And we were raised in that, let's say, atheist environment.
Yo nací en una familia revolucionaria, comunista, atea, donde hablar de Dios no era algo concebido. Yo no conocía nada ni de la Biblia, ni de Jesucristo, nunca había escuchado nada que tuviera que ver con una iglesia. Pero con 15 años, los amiguitos del barrio comenzaron a visitar la iglesia presbiteriana. Entonces me invitan y yo fui a un estudio bíblico en Navidad. Me presentaron a un hombre que yo no conocía, que se llamaba Jesús. Así conocía al Señor y esos fueron mis primeros pasos dentro de la iglesia.
We understand that people are very much thirsty here in Cuba, and they want to learn more about the Bible, about God, about spirituality. People, they look for these opportunities, start reading the Bible and participating in the Bible studies in the houses and even going to church as well. So there is a huge movement of the Spirit throughout the island in terms of people gaining more and more interest in the spiritual things.
The Evangelical Theological Seminary of Matanzas, Cuba is at the center of church life. For over 70 years, the seminary has trained pastors and other church leaders for the many very active congregations on the island.
The philosophy of our seminary is the integration of theory and practice, which means that from Monday to Friday, they receive the theoretical academic classes per se, and also over the weekends, the churches send them to the different local parishes.
Soñamos con que esta escuela sea una escuela que, sobre todo, que responda a las necesidades de la iglesia cubana. Pastores con ministros bien preparados, pero sobre todo insertados, muy bien insertados en la realidad cubana y el contexto cubano.
If you can imagine, about 80% of those attending Presbyterian churches in Cuba are brand new believers. And the faith is growing fastest among teenagers and young adults, many of whom have already expressed a clear interest in church leadership as pastors, youth leaders, musicians, and in other roles.
Y hay una frase muy popular en Cuba que dice que la juventud está perdida. pero yo tengo mucha esperanza en Dios y pienso que los jóvenes no solo somos el futuro, sino también somos el presente.
Y ha sido una experiencia muy linda de renovación, de entrega, de servicio, de vocación, de sentir que puedo hacer mucho más por la iglesia.
No solo el pastoral y su asignatura, ¿no? Con su excelente trabajo en hacerme repensar en mi fe, sino también el trabajo en la iglesia local, me hicieron ver más allá de lo que yo quería o pensaba que podía ser. Y es así como yo.
Y pienso que si la iglesia de los primeros siglos, los padres de la iglesia tuvieron esperanza de que la iglesia, de ser reprimida, pasara a una iglesia abierta y que estuviera en todo el mundo y en todas las naciones, pienso que nosotros tenemos esperanza y fe en el Señor de que la juventud va a seguir estando ahí, va a seguir trabajando y sirviendo para la gloria de Dios y para la iglesia.
The churches in the 1990s, at the beginning of the new millennium, started to grow tremendously. And as a direct result, we started to have a new influx of students in our seminary. To the extent that, for example, we were only 4 students that graduated in the seminary, and now we have around 500 students in our different programs.
This kind of growth is incredibly exciting, but it's also very challenging because it creates the need for new, well-trained church leadership, as well as the construction and upkeep of church facilities, many of which are used almost every day for these rapidly growing congregations and the communities that they serve.
The Cuban church and the Presbyterian Church in the USA have been in partnership for many years.
That's right.
When relationships broke with the governments, that partnership was also tenuous. But the churches continued to seek fellowship and understanding, even through those very difficult times.
The Cubans often say that by having these relationships, they realize they're not alone. Even though they may have been isolated through some of these years, the connection through the church is what's been constant.
This work in the seminary is a joyful and hopeful work. No? It helps us to see with optimism even when things are not so clear and things are not so certain. It is an opportunity always to be certain that even when we don't know what the future holds, we know who holds the future.
There is a church in Cuba. It's a faithful church. It's a working church. It's a church serving the community. It's a church that have been in trouble in the past, and they survive, and they will be faithful to their faith and try to model to the Cuban country what it means to be the kingdom of God in the middle of this history.
If you or your church would like to get involved, partnering with this beautifully fertile place of Christian mission, and join in the amazing work that God is doing in Cuba, please contact us today. And thank you for your faithfulness.
Lovely.
It's good to have a professional IT. Huh? Don't you think?
Yes.
Let's put our hands together for love. Thank you. Makes Kendall feel proud. No?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, is everybody awake?
Yes.
Now this is siesta time, so I'm going to look very carefully to your eyes to see if you are praying for Cuba or awake. So, I'm going to share some information with this PowerPoint. Thank you, Wade, again for setting up all this. Basically, 4 quick points. Some information about the Cuban context, in general, on the churches in particular. Then a bit of more information regarding our Ecumenical Theological Seminary, And then finally, 2 or 3 ideas regarding our partnership between our seminary and, well, the churches in Cuba and our people with living waters for the world. So the situation in Cuba today is very critical. There's a group of this church that just arrived last Saturday with a first-hand experience, no? I think one of the worst, let's say, consequences of our crisis is precisely the shortage of medicines. People that cannot make it because they do not have the medicine. We have very highly qualified medical doctors. In fact, we have a school of medicine that we have students from all over the world, particularly from the global south. We even have students from the US. Did you know there are American students studying medicine in Cuba? Most of the people do not know that. And of course, it's a challenge for them for their degree to be recognized, but at least they receive really a good training. So we lack of food. There's a lack of food, fuel, public transportation. For example, we have, again, our seminary. I should have brought a map. Our seminary is 60 miles east Havana, and we have professors in Havana that come to teach to our campus. On Wednesdays, they spend the night and they go back. They come on Tuesdays, they spend the night and go back on Wednesdays. And they teach there. For the first time this week, I heard that we could not bring the professors because we didn't have the fuel to do it, as simple as that. So we have also long blackouts, etc., which affect pretty much the livelihood of the people. Very high cost of living, precisely during the COVID when we didn't have tourist groups coming in, and you know tourism is our main income source of our country. Also, on the one hand, we didn't have any income because of tourism. Our airports were shut. But on the other hand, the government, our Cuban state, was spending millions of dollars trying to save lives of the people. By the way, we produce our own vaccines. We have 5 different vaccines that has helped us to save lives. But also the effects of climate change is the same way that you have here all the Eddie, what did you mention? The prayer concern, the tornadoes. Thank you.
Natural disasters.
Tornadoes, natural disasters. We have more in the Caribbean. We have more frequent and more intense hurricanes, which are devastating, really, our country. So that has also a tremendous negative impact. Like, for example, Hurricane Ian devastated the western part of our island and came all the way up and also did a lot of damage here in Florida as well. So we have a crisis not only, I would say, of material things, but also a crisis of values, of meaning, no? Ideological crisis, no? I see in this country there's a lot of polarization between Democrats and Republicans. We have similar polarizations in Cuba. And it's interesting that for many years during the atheist time, we were so materialistic that nobody talked out of the churches about need for spirituality. Now the members of the Communist Party, the highest leaders of our country are talking about the need of spirituality, no? The importance of that inner strength that we get through our faith, which the same way there are different types of spiritualities, there are different types of faith, and we try to contribute to this whole discussion from a Judeo-Christian or biblical perspective. What does it mean, spirituality today? What does it mean that we are moved by the Spirit? in order to work towards transformation. So that's an area that we are pretty much involved in the churches in general and our seminary in particular. So when we talk about crisis, what are the causes on the one hand, and what are the consequences? One of the causes is the state, well, during the 1990s, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and Eastern European Communist bloc, we went through a very, very, very deep crisis, and we haven't recovered yet from that. They call it the spatial period. I'm still wondering why they call it spatial, because it was very, very hard, very harsh. And the government introduced a currency called CUC. And the moment in which they decided to change that was precisely during the COVID pandemic, again, when we did not have incomes because of the airports. They were closed, and no flights were in the air, as it happened not only in Cuba, but of course, globally. As many of you know, with Obama in his second term, the relationships got pretty normal between our both countries. Embassies in both countries were reopened. Obama himself was the first president that visited Cuba during the revolution time, which was triumphed on the 1st of January 1959. And all that changed with President Trump. Trump closed again the embassies, and no more flights to Cuba from the US, etc. And in a very unfair way, Cuba was included in the list of those countries that sponsor terrorism, and that has a tremendous negative impact on us, because that prevents us from receiving funds. Obviously, if we are a country that we sponsor terrorism, we're not supposed to receive money, because we're going to keep on killing people, no? And that is very, very unfair. Instead of sponsoring terrorism, we actually sponsor healthcare in different parts of the world. And COVID, of course, was another cause of our crisis. We lost 8,500 people because of COVID, even with our very highly effective vaccines. And of course, the international financial recession, you're experiencing it here yourself. There's already some bankruptcy, some banks that are in bankruptcy, and as a result mainly of the war in Ukraine and other factors. So these are the causes. Now, consequences of the crisis. For the first time on July the 11th of a couple of years ago, we had people out in the streets protesting, no? Because of the harsh situation we have had throughout all this time. But at the same time, it's important to say that the social media, digital social media, has also played an important role trying to encourage hatred, and a lot of fake news, no? Another very sad and tragic consequence of our crisis is precisely migration. We have had different waves of migration throughout the 65 years of the revolution, and ours, and this one of last year, 2022, was the biggest. Almost 300,000 people emigrated. We call it irregular migration, people getting in boats, going through Central America, a lot of human trafficking, people paying around $10,000, $15,000 for letting people out, not letting people out, but supporting people as they move in Central America, trying to enter in the US. territory. Many people do not know that for a Cuban person, it's very difficult to get a visa, an entry visa in another country. But in this particular country, when you enter with a Cuban passport, the Cuban passport is one of the most valuable in the whole world, because when the U.S. government turns back people coming from Mexico even, from Central America, Venezuela, other countries, when a Cuban arrives in this territory and you show the Cuban passport, and you argue that you're persecuted by the Castro's communist regime, you're accepted as a hero, and you're never turned back, and you will soon get a green card, and you will soon get a U.S. citizenship. No, many people do not know that we have that special treatment. When most of the people the great, I would say 98% of those 300,000 that have fled the country so far go out for economic reasons, trying to find new economic opportunities. And the other problem, another consequence, which is quite new, is that we're starting to see a widening gap between the rich and poor. I remember in 1985, a group of 18 young Christians, we visited Nicaragua. We were eating in a public restaurant, and kids started to stand in front of our table begging for food. It is one of the worst and saddest experiences that you can have, trying to eat while a child is begging for food. No? Terrible experience. Thank God we haven't reached that point in Cuba yet. We do not have children begging in the streets or cleaning the windshields of the cars instead of going to school. The thing is not that critical, but we're starting to see a widening gap between those that do have hard currency and those do not have, although the crisis is so deep that even having hard currency, you're going through a very difficult situation. Is everybody awake?
Yes.
Do you understand my Spanglish?
Yes.
Okay. It's good. The Spanglish is good.
Yeah.
Good.
We're following.
Thank you for your encouragement. But we also have signs of hope, no? The sermon that I preached last Sunday in Westminster Presbyterian Church in Nashville was precisely on this. If we as Christians do not have hope, and if it's not a hope that is based on the victorious resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm tempted to preach that sermon here again, but I won't, so don't worry, our faith would not make any sense. No, we are the first believers precisely based on the resurrection of Christ, that hope is a basic feature in our lives. As I mentioned in the interview of the Presbyterian Foundation, if you ask me here what's going to happen next month in Cuba, I don't know. I honestly do not know from a human perspective. We don't know what the future holds. That's what I said. But we know who holds the future, and that is God. God, the Almighty, that gave, as Pastor Eddie said this morning during the moment of the offering, who gave His only Son, no? Through love. No? So that is our faith. Even during the atheist times, when many people left the churches and they left the country because they wanted to pay the price of being an atheist, and we can talk more about that later if you have that question. Even during those tough times, no, we were certain who was holding the future, who is holding the future, which is God. Among signs of hope, We have the boosting of a private sector that is making a big difference. Socialist system is very just when it works. But I'm afraid that state enterprises are not that effective as the private sector. I can give you a huge amount of examples. I think one of the signs of hope that the Cuban government and the Cuban state and the Communist Party is realizing that. And we are having increasingly number of private companies that are serving in Cuba, having to pay taxes, of course. That's a new phenomenon. The improvement of the tourist industry. We're building more hotels. We have an increasing solidarity of people with Cuba, not only church people like you, but other people that are in favor of our people, of our system, etc. We have new trade agreements with your enemies, no? With Russia, with China, the Latin American community of states. We have a number of progressive presidents in Latin America that are bringing us a sign of hope, like for example the President Lula in Brazil, President AMLO in Mexico, etc. And precisely during these days we are renewing our parliament with a strong commitment of helping to get out of the crisis. Regarding the U.S. and Cuba relationships, already a year ago, President Biden started to revert some of the measures that Trump made. For example, he reopened the embassies in both countries. Now we have more flights from American airports to Cuban international airports. We have an increasing number of licenses. A regular American, if you want to go, you are free to travel wherever you want to. But if you want to travel to Cuba as a tourist, you're not allowed. Because of the embargo, you're not allowed to spend your money in Cuba, and therefore you're not allowed to travel to Cuba as a tourist. But then we have a number of licenses, like is, for example, through churches. Living Waters for the World, for example, you have a license for traveling and also for taking cash to Cuba, and that has always been respected, which we appreciate, by the different American administrations. Trump put a ceiling of the remittances. Remittances are the financial contributions of families that live here. They earn money and they send back home. For example, in El Salvador, the main income source there in Central America is precisely remittances. No, this was very limited by Trump. $1,000. I think it was every 3 months, and Biden took off that roof. No, now the families can send more money to Cuba, and now after the big wave of irregular migrants, Biden's administration about a month ago introduced a new program of sponsoring. So if a person living in Cuba finds a sponsor here in this country that can pay the expenses for about 3 years, no, they can fill some forms, and that sponsoring person can bring families over to Cuba, and of course that is another way of doing brain drain, which is damaging us so much. A new interesting, very recent development, we could not accept American dollars in Cuba, because according to the Cuban authorities, when the Cuban banks wanted to cash that money, they couldn't because of the embargo. Looks like that has changed, because now the Cuban banks are accepting American dollars. That is a new development. That means that you no longer need to change your dollars to euros. Now you can take your dollars directly to Cuba and deposit in the banks, and that's also going to help us to receive more dollars. Just to mention, regarding the relationships between church and state, we have two big moments, no? The first moment, as I mentioned in the video, is the first half since 1962 that the communist character of the revolution was declared because of the Soviet influence. That meant that we could not, no churches were closed in Cuba, no priests were persecuted openly, as it happened in Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. But we had a more subtle type of discrimination by which me, as a young Christian, I could not study any career that would have an impact in the ideology of the people. I could not study journalism or psychology or foreign affairs, precisely because they didn't trust me. I mean, I was, as a religious person, I was part of that past bourgeoisie and capitalism, and therefore the Marxist mentality at that time was, as far as the revolutionary government is able to solve the material needs of the people, there's no spiritual needs. This is the time in which I mentioned earlier that nothing of spirituality was mentioned, and therefore there's no need for churches. And they had this mindset, we're not going to close the churches, they're going to collapse by themselves throughout the time. That, thank God, changed 180 degrees after the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989. In 1991, we had the fourth Congress of the Communist Party. The members of the party they were not allowed to go to church, or their children or their grandchildren. In the house of Eddie 2 nights ago, I mentioned this example of a member of the Communist Party that came to see me when I served in a pastor in a rural area. He came to see me because he wanted for me to baptize his grandchild in a hidden way. He didn't want for anybody to know that I was baptizing the child. And I said, I'm sorry, baptism according to the Reformed tradition is a public celebration. It's a community celebration where the whole church engages in the spiritual growth of this particular child that's being baptized. In 1992, we had a public referendum, and we adopted, we moved from an implicitly atheist constitution to one that is now currently secular, or it's also known as a lay constitution, by which each Cuban citizen can choose freely what religion or what ideology should or are able to choose. The current situation of the Cuban churches, well, as I mentioned in the video, there is a big revival in the 1990s. First, because the state was open towards religion, but also I was remembering the visit of Archbishop Desmond Tutu when I was serving in the World Council of Churches in Geneva. He came to visit us in 2003, 2004, and he said, the gospel of Jesus Christ is more meaningful for those whose life is rough. In a situation of roughness of life, there's where the gospel of Jesus Christ becomes more meaningful. That's one of the reasons why our churches are packed full of people, and it's one of the reasons why I'm afraid many churches here in the global north, particularly in Europe, are empty. And many churches are selling their church buildings because they feel that they do not need God. Everything is satisfied. I have all my health care solved, my education, my food, my basic needs, and therefore I don't need God. No? That is not the case in Cuba. Churches are full of people because people depend on God. No? As I read in a big sign in a trip I made to San Jose, Costa Rica, a big truck, we were driving behind a big truck that said, "Don't tell God that you have a big problem. Tell your problem that you have a big God." No? Tell your problem that you have a big God, and therefore you're going to solve it. One of the biggest tragic things that we're facing in Cuba today, the churches, is a proliferation of fundamentalist and conservative churches, prosperity gospel, which are creating a lot of divisions. They come and they ask Eddie, how much do you earn as a pastor? You don't have to tell me how much you earn as a pastor here publicly, but how much you're a Cuban pastor, you earn $50. That's more or less our average salary. You earn $50, okay, I'll pay you $100, $150 if you work for my ministry. No? And then you have pastors that are leaving the so-called historical churches to work in these ministries because these guys come in with a lot of money. They see somebody that has a good-looking person. He or she, particularly he, didn't have whatsoever any theological training. Good-looking, they give him money, they give him a suit, a tie, a house, a car, even with all the difficulties we have in the country, and that is creating a lot of divisions of the body of Christ. No? Part of that situation is theological training. No? One of the main concerns that we have in our seminary, which is 77 years old already, Ecumenical Theological Seminary, is how can we continue pursuing a high-quality education. But many of these people come with what my predecessor, Emilio Arce, calls my PhD microwave. No, microwave PhDs. Microwave PhDs. That means you open your microwave, you put the ingredients, you press a button, and there pops out a new PhD. And you pay $2,000 and you get a PhD. These are the ones that people are coming to our country, selling PhDs. And there's a big competition. No, it's easier to buy a degree, even when not many people can afford paying $200 in Cuba to purchase a degree. We are struggling with that type of mindset and practice. As I mentioned before, the importance of proclaiming a message of hope and reconciliation, to play a prophetic role. Prophetic role, that means to comfort the people, but also to confront the state, the government, the party. We have had many opportunities of meeting with Fidel Castro when he was alive and with our presidents to share concerns on our regarding our country, not only the churches. The diaconal ministries, you know, the word diaconia is a New Testament word, it means service, no? Those first 30 years of the revolution, when the state was taking care of all social services and the church didn't do anything, we were pretty much confined to the four walls of the sanctuary. When I studied in the seminary in the 1980s, I studied for a type of church that was pretty much confined to the four walls of the sanctuary. One of the biggest challenges of our theological education in our seminaries today is how can we continue forming new pastors and new theologians as community facilitators, community organizers. The Cuban state is not only allowing, but is even expecting from the churches to play a difference, to make a difference, preaching gospel, holistic gospel through spirituality, but also through actions. Cuban churches and the COVID, I'm going to skip that. And then in 5 more minutes to talk about our seminary. Our seminary was founded in 1946. We have around 15 historically established theological seminaries in Cuba, and ours is the only ecumenical one. We have had graduates of more than 30 different denominations, but we are mainly ecumenical because our board of trustees is formed by 4 different denominations. We not only are ecumenical in the sense that we are interdenominational from a church point of view, but also we are interreligious. We have a program, it's called the Higher Ecumenical Institute of Sciences of Religion, where we have students and professors of different religions that we bring together. We realize that there's a lot of prejudice, for example, against the African descendant religions that feeds in popular religiosity. And one of the things that we try to do is to create a space of sharing our different beliefs and how do we compare. And we discover many interesting things that we have more things in common. And basically the main thing we have in common is how can we, through our religious discourse and our religious practice, how can we make a difference in a society that needs transformation to keep also our people together. As I mentioned, it's important for us the high quality academic training, and therefore one of the things that we do as well is we deal with not only with biblical sciences but also other social sciences in order for the theological training to be more, let's say, better informed. During the COVID worst period of time, which was June and July, summer of 2021, the pediatric hospital nearby our seminary got so overwhelmed that they could not accept more patients. So they came to ask us if we would be open to accept patients, which of course we did. And during 47 days, we took care of 1,500 patients, 900 children and 600 adults, and that helped us, gave us the opportunity precisely of saving lives of people. And we were very nervous because we had to take care of the members of our community, of our campus, but thank God that went well, and we managed really to help to save lives. One of the things that helped COVID, that helped us, we wanted to introduce before the pandemic classes online. We have an increasing, we have a better access to the internet, safer, faster, and more reliable, and more affordable. And we wanted to introduce classes online because our sister seminaries have that type of classes. Most of our faculty didn't want to because, well, they said nothing can replace the face-to-face classes. Of course, nobody can argue that. But when pandemic came and we had to shut down the whole thing, we didn't have any other option than to teach through the internet, and that came to stay. Now we have what we call the hybrid method of teaching theology, which is combining both physical presence and also online. This beautiful photo, and I'll end here, is the experience we had 3 Sundays ago. I mentioned that our seminary is 77 years old, but even before that, for more than 80 years, for those of you who have been to our seminary know that we are at the top of a hill, and just behind is the bay. We are heading the east there, and from 500 to 1,000 people come up from all their different denominations, including Roman Catholics. Many of them do not sleep that night. They have activities in their churches during the night, and they come up right in the middle of the night, and at 6:30 in the morning, when it's still dark, we start our worship. And the sun starts coming out behind the cross with the white sheet as a symbol, no? That life is conquered death, no? That in spite of the darkness, in spite of the crisis, in spite of the negative situations that we face, the victory of the resurrection of Christ is above all that. So in the last few years, we have been broadcasting it on TV. We have it on YouTube. If you're interested, I can share with you the link, and there you can see it's a beautiful experience because it's very well done from the artistic point of view, because it's made also for the TV, and it's a way precisely of proclaiming the message of hope in Jesus Christ. Set and Living Waters for the World Partnership, I mentioned, no, in 2009, the first water system was installed in our seminary. We are, the 65th is about to open now, and we as a seminary, we are, let's say, the coordinators, or we help to support the follow-up. And it's important, Living Waters for the World, not only to save literally lives of the people, it has also, of course, the spiritual component, Jesus as the water of life, but also behind each water system there's a beautiful history of relationship, of partnership. Groups coming down with their suitcases packed of filters and all that stuff, worshiping together, doing mission together. Some of you just came a few days ago having that experience. So I wanted to give that testimony here on behalf of our seminary and the churches in Cuba, how much we appreciate the effort, the work of Kendall and crew and all different groups that come down, helping us to save the lives of the people. And when during the COVID time, when everybody was locked down, some people came out to get their living water, and that was very meaningful. I will end with these questions without answering them. What is the kind of country's project do we want? We debate a lot about that. We need an order that can guarantee justice and dignity for all in our nation. The mission of the churches today is to play a prophetic role, to be agents of change, spirituality of transformation, and promoting the values of the kingdom that, according to Romans 14:17, are the values of peace, joy, and justice through the Holy Spirit. So we absolutely know who holds the future. And I end with this illustration. I learned recently this word in English, seesaw. No? It's very difficult to ride the seesaw on one end without having somebody on the other. So mutuality in mission is what it's all about. Certain that we belong to the same body of Christ with different cultural, political, social expressions, but we belong to the same body of Christ, and therefore mutuality, reciprocity is basic in our work. The sign there in Spanish says, if you do not understand what reciprocity means, go to the playground and get on your seesaw. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have spoken too much today.
No,
So I don't know if you have
good.
questions.
I do have one. Go back a few slides.
Which one?
To the one where you had the picture, that one, right?
That one, yes.
There's a word evangelical that's there.
Yes.
that carries a different freight
Yes,
here than it
yes,
does there.
yes.
Can you explain from a
thank
Cuban
you.
perspective what evangelical means?
Thank you, thank you. I wanted to mention that and I forgot. The word evangelical in the States is misleading as far as we are concerned, no? As a seminary. The thing is that in Spanish, evangelical and Protestant are quite similar. It should say Protestant Seminary of Theology. I rather, and quite intentionally, replace the word evangelical by ecumenical. We prefer to go rather by Ecumenical Seminary of Theology than evangelical. We are not an evangelical seminary in the sense that you know about. We are more evangelical in the sense of ecumenical, as a Protestant one. So thank you for asking that question, because you remind me that I always make that clarification, point of clarification, because it's misleading, the evangelical. Thank you. Yes.
You brought up the point early on about the lack of medicine and food in Cuba. To put a finer point on it, in general, medicines are missing, but the real deal was people who are diabetic there can't maintain that. People who have high blood pressure are not able to maintain that. And we ran into cases of that, and that brought it home to me when I was down there. Medicines are medicines, but there are people who actually rely on these things on a daily basis for their health to carry on or for them to live, and they're not able to get those kind of medicines. On our trip, we took down syringes because one person had been reusing a syringe over and over because they didn't have syringes, and so we had a box of, 100 syringes, brand new ones, that we hauled down there and gave to him, but as Kendall handed them off and was talking to him, they realized, he said, well, thank you, we no longer can get insulin. And so, and he had, actually his toes had been removed, he was in bad shape, but that's the reality of what short of medicine means down there.
Thank you. Something as simple as syringes, needles, alcohol, cotton, difficult to get. We have plenty of drinking alcohol. That's, by the way, one of the problems that we are facing, some alcoholism, particularly among the young people. It's one of our paradoxes. We have alcohol for drinking, but not enough for our wounds, for healing our wounds. Thank you for yes, thank you. Yes, we have highly, let's say, well-trained medical doctors. They know what to do facing a person in his or her illness. And it's heartbreaking to know how to cure this particular person, or this particular disease, and not having how to solve it. No? So that's why we're going back a little bit to so-called green medicine and to the traditional medicine to try to at least solve. What you wanted to?
I was just going to ask if you could explain, because I know it's confusing for us here. How are people getting rich in Cuba?
And how do you define rich?
I was going to say because rich in Cuba, it's a relative term, because you know the richness compared to the poverty. If you allow me, I would rephrase the question. Not so much how do people get rich, but how can people get better off, with more incomes. Well, first of all, having families abroad that send remittances. We have a joke in Spanish, but it only makes sense in Spanish. Faith in Spanish is a very short word. It's F-E, fe. Fe. Fe, apart from the real meaning of faith, is families in the exterior.
Wow.
How are you coping? Well, I have fe. Yo tengo fe. What type of fe? Is it Christian faith or is it family in the exterior that send remittances? Or both? Or both. So that's one way. Another way is those that work in the tourist industry, which is not all over the place, but basically where the beaches are. Thirdly, I mentioned the private enterprise. One of the most sad things that we have to admit is we know of surgeons, doctors that operate. They operate on some patients during the day, and during the night they are taxi drivers because they cannot make enough money as doctors. And they earn more as taxi drivers than surgeons. What is the result of that? What is the consequence? They leave the country. They come to this country where a surgeon becomes rich, no? So I think basically those are the three, I would say, main extra income sources. Not to become rich, but at least to be a better well off.
And the opportunity for the private business is not really open to all.
I would say yes. I would say it's open to all, but in a slow process. No, the bureaucracy is killing us. That's part of our own problem. It doesn't depend on the embargo. It's our own internal blockade. There's a lot of bureaucracy, but eventually the private enterprise, either taxi drivers or any other business, you have to learn how to pay taxes and all that stuff. No, it is. Yes.
What about government employees? Are there government employees that are wealthy? At the top of the... No? Okay.
Not necessarily. No, we don't have that situation. Sorry, I'm speaking with it's bad manners.
You've had bad manners all week, man. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
If there is somebody that can bear witness of that, it's you.
Yeah. Nice answer.
Although I don't agree with it, but anyway.
No, you shouldn't agree with me. I'm just kidding you.
No, we had a great time together. No, people that work privately, those are the ones that earn a lot of money, much more than what an officer can earn. It's part of our sad stories. Elementary school teacher do not earn enough money, and they want to go to the tourist industry, or they want to leave the country. And I compare that migration with bleeding, a body that is bleeding to death. Life is coming out. These are smart people, highly qualified. Okay, so yes.
Where do the fundamentalists come from, who come to Cuba and then pay the ministers or priests?
They come from the U.S.
The U.S.
Yes. I forgot to mention that. They come from the USA. These televangelists, these evangelicals, no? Which are not us. And yes, prosperity gospel. The more you give, the more God will bless you. And the poorer you are, the more you give. And it's very sad because it's basically, you're talking, Tom, about leaders of the government that earn pastors. Many of these pastors of prosperity gospel. They're the ones that personally profit from those. We call it the widow's offering, the offering of the widow. No, they come from the U.S. We have heard about them for many years in Central America, but finally they came to Cuba, also coming from the U.S. with a lot of money. And the interesting thing is that they come with a tourist visa. Tourist visa. That means that it's illegal not only in Cuba, in any part of the world. If you come with a tourist visa, you're not supposed to do mission. You're not supposed to do any, to carry out any job. So they come with tourist visa. They call themselves missionaries. I call them mercenaries. Because of that, they come with a lot of money. And then, when they are called by the authorities, why are you doing mission with a tourist visa? They come back to the state saying, we do not have religious freedom in Cuba. There's no freedom of worship in Cuba. Of course there's no freedom of worship if you want to do mission with a tourist visa. For that we apply for, we call it religious visas, precisely to do mission in the streets or to install water, living water systems, etc. No? They're coming from the States. So one of the advantages of the embargo is that, few advantages is that problems in your society, like for example, gun violence. We don't have that in our country. We have a lot of problems. We have problems of violence, perhaps verbal, but not gun violence. No, so this type of thing. But this is what we get from the U.S. We get a lot of good things from the U.S. as well, just living waters for the world. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. I have been looking at your faces, and everybody's awake still. So thank you. God bless you, and thank you. Thank you. Your solidarity, your accompaniment, your prayers are very meaningful for us.
Well, it's good to have you among us, and we want to give thanks for that. I guess we need to clean up. Any instructions there? Leave everything here?
Yeah.
All right.
Some folks are hanging back.
Prepared the food. We want to give thanks for that. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll have more questions.
So many times. Yes, look here. This is better.
Well, yeah.
I was holding the cold water.
We'll get you a plate of food and some.
Let me go 1 second to the bathroom.
Yeah.
My brother, you revealed my problem publicly.
You ought to know by after the week that I tell my daughters, I tease you.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Long week.
There you go. It's not easy to put with this guy that long.
Long week.
I tease those I love.
Thank you. I realize that. I realize that. You know, we have a phrase in Spanish. With friends like that, you don't need enemies.
You know what?
It's funny. One of the pastors in that video saw me watch this last week.
Fernando.
Yeah, I think he has 12 videos. He looked like 15 when I saw him.
Very young.
But his wife was a Quaker.
And they have a new baby.
Yeah, we never saw her.
Yes, his wife is a Quaker, but I understand she's trying to see the light. So she's converting to
she's getting predestined?
Yeah, there you go. Predestined.
I was a Methodist for about 30 years before I came here. For 30 years.
Predestined as well. Yes.
You're heading back now? You're doing things where you...
Yes.
What are you doing? What training? I did a 102. At the same time, Mike did his 101. And essentially another friend of ours did his 103 that same trip. And as we were leaving to go to Cuba, 2 weeks ago. We passed him on the highway. He moved out of town to Cuba. Just happened to be on the highway at the same time. We're going to Cuba and he's going back to Cuba. Wow, that's kind of neat. He never was able to go. Yeah.
But maybe he'll come back.
Well, Ryan.
Yeah, we had some visitors.
Yeah, he left. Anyway, my boys walked home, so I got good to meet you. Good luck with everything.
Sorry, my hands are a bit cold. I was holding
glass box. I would like to find one of these. I saw that again.
Did I tell you the story of this? When Obama came to Cuba, we invited, I was invited to the theater for his book. I didn't meet him personally, but there was a senator that was coming down the stairs. I introduced myself. We talked about, then I asked him, how can you get a theater?
See, that's what I was hoping to get when
I wanted to ask his name, but he left right away. I gave him my card.
I would like to,
I'm gonna get Carlos a plate. He didn't want to eat before he. Okay. If there's.
But hopefully next time.